The moment the hatchling turned its head toward me, every muscle in my body locked in place, because I knew, without any doubt, that I was about to become the center of an event I had no right to be part of. My name is Daniel Whitlock, and I was never meant to stand anywhere near the choosing grounds. I was a maintenance worker on Velmara Station, sent there that morning to repair a broken coolant valve along the perimeter fence. I carried a tool bag over my shoulder and grease on my hands, and my translator chip buzzed faintly behind my ear, still struggling with the sharp tones of the Velkari language, even after 11 years of living among them. The Velkari were not a species that noticed people like me. To them, humans were hired hands, useful for fixing reactors, patching old dreadnoughts, and keeping their orbital rings from falling apart. We were never invited to ceremonies. We were never expected to matter. That morning, the sacred clutch had hatched 3 days early, which every noble on the station whispered about as a bad omen. 7 hatchlings lay curled together, their scales a deep polished black, with thin lines of glowing orange energy pulsing beneath the surface, like veins of fire trapped under stone. Around them stood 7 heirs from the great houses, each dressed in ceremonial silk, each raised since birth to appear calm, commanding, and worthy of a dragon's loyalty. I was 30 meters away, kneeling by an access panel, trying to stay invisible, when the smallest hatchling, the one with an unopened wing, lifted its head away from the circle of nobles and looked directly at me. I did not move. I did not speak. Every instinct told me that drawing attention to myself in a moment like that could end badly, because even a newborn dragon carries enough strength to crush a transport shuttle without effort. But the creature did not hesitate. It rose on unsteady legs and walked straight through the ceremonial circle, passing between 2 heirs of ancient bloodlines, as if they were nothing more than furniture in its path. It pressed its head against my chest and made a low, questioning sound, a tone I had never heard a dragon use before. It was not a roar. It was not a warning. It sounded almost like a child asking a quiet question. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I had ever experienced in my life. Nobles froze. Guards froze. Even the wind across the open plaza seemed to pause. The station's chief warden, a large and serious Velkari named Hastor Vem, approached slowly, as though walking toward something that might explode. He crouched down to meet my eyes, which Velkari almost never do for a human, and asked me, in a careful and measured voice, what I had done to summon the hatchling. I told him the truth. I had done nothing. I was only there to fix a valve. He studied the hatchling, who pressed harder against me, and wrapped its small, uninjured wing around my shoulder, as if declaring to everyone present that I now belonged to it. It took weeks before I understood what had actually happened, and even longer before the rest of the station accepted it. Hastor explained it to me privately, once the shouting inside the assembly hall had quieted enough for calm conversation. He said that for 900 years, the Velkari nobility believed dragons bonded only with bloodline, with ancient lineage, with families bred for generations to carry the right scent, the right posture, the right presence. It was a story so old that no one questioned it, because questioning it would have shaken the entire foundation of their society. But that story, Hastor admitted, had never truly been tested. No outsider had ever been allowed close enough to a hatchling to prove otherwise, until that morning. What a hatchling truly searches for, in its first fragile hour of life, is not power or heritage. It searches for the nearest presence that does not react to it with fear, worship, or desperate ambition. Not recklessness, not performance, just quiet steadiness, the kind that comes from someone who has never once felt the need to impress a dragon, because it never occurred to them to try. Every noble child raised for that ceremony had spent their whole life training to appear composed, dignified, and destined for greatness. They walked into that circle already performing. The hatchling had spent 3 days surrounded by creatures who either reached for it with greed or postured in front of it with pride. I was the first living thing in its short existence that had simply been busy, mildly irritated about broken machinery, and completely unbothered by the fact that it was a dragon at all. The assembly argued about what had happened for 6 long weeks. Some houses filed formal complaints, demanding the bond be dissolved on some ancient technicality. Others quietly worried that if the truth spread, that dragons never answered to bloodline at all, the entire structure that decided who ruled and who served would collapse overnight. There were closed meetings late into the night. There were threats made and withdrawn. At one point, 2 rival houses nearly challenged each other over who should be blamed for the failure of the ceremony, though cooler voices stepped in before anything happened. Through all of it, I kept showing up to work every morning, because someone still needed the station's cooling systems repaired, and because staying busy helped me avoid thinking too hard about the impossible situation I now found myself inside. The hatchling, who was eventually named Emberlin once she was old enough to be given a proper title, refused to be separated from me during any of the hearings. Wardens tried gently guiding her toward the noble quarters, hoping she might reconsider once removed from my presence. She simply turned around and walked back to my side of the plaza every single time, until even her strongest opponents in the assembly stopped trying. There was one afternoon I will never forget, when the Council of Elders summoned me directly, wanting to understand, in my own words, why I believed the bond had happened to me instead of to any of the trained heirs. I stood in front of 9 ancient Velkhari lords, all of them older than my grandparents combined, and told them plainly that I had no explanation beyond the fact that dragons, apparently, do not care about titles. One elder, a sharp-voiced woman named Corvessa Ithrin, asked whether I intended to claim any political standing because of the bond. I told her honestly that I only wanted to keep doing my job and make sure Emberlin grew up safe. That answer, more than anything else I said that day, seemed to settle the room. Over the following months, I learned how to care for a growing dragon while still fixing valves, replacing filters, and repairing generators across the station. Emberlin would often curl beside the maintenance bay while I worked, watching every tool with sharp curiosity, occasionally nudging a wrench toward me if I dropped it. She grew quickly, and within a year, she was large enough to shade half the loading dock with a single wing. Word of what had happened eventually spread beyond Velmara Station, reaching other colonies, and even distant Velkhari homeworlds. Some called it an accident of fate. Others called it proof that the old rules had been built on nothing but tradition and fear. A quiet number of young Velkhari, tired of rigid customs, began treating the story as a symbol of something new, a sign that worth could come from character rather than birthright. Hastor Vem, who had once approached me with such caution, became something close to a friend over time. He would often stop by the maintenance bay just to watch Emberlin rest her head near my workstation, shaking his head slightly, as if still trying to make sense of the world shifting in front of him. Even now, grandchildren of the old council members give me nervous, curious looks whenever I pass through the central corridors, because their education now includes a strange historical footnote about the day a human repair technician became the first outsider in 9 centuries to bond with a Velkhari dragon. Emberlin is enormous now, capable of casting a shadow over an entire hangar, yet she still presses her head gently against my chest whenever the noise of the station becomes too much for either of us. She still makes that same low, questioning sound she made on the very first day we met, as though checking whether I remain exactly as unimpressed by all of it as I was back then. I always answer the same way, quietly, without ceremony, because that is the only thing that has ever mattered to her. And yes, I did eventually finish fixing that coolant valve, though it took another 20 minutes longer than expected, once the crowd around us finally stopped shouting long enough to let me work.